There's a silent tragedy playing out in the lives of countless people. It's not the tragedy of failure or heartbreak or even loss. It's the tragedy of being too nice and of being agreeable when you should speak truth, of saying yes when your soul is screaming no, of constantly shrinking, bending and sacrificing not out of love, but out of fear. And the world praises you for it. They call you kind. They call you selfless. But deep down, you feel it, you're disappearing. And Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, would have seen this for what it truly is, not virtue, but a subtle form of self-betrayal. Because Stoicism isn't about being passive. It's about being just. And justice, real justice, starts with being honest with yourself. So in this video, we're going to tear apart the illusion that being nice is always good. We'll explore how it can quietly ruin your relationships, sabotage your purpose, and erode your inner strength. And we'll uncover how Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics offer a radically different path, one that leads not to people-pleasing, but to personal power. Here's the philosophical hook. What if being too nice is actually a violation of nature? Think about how the Stoics viewed the universe. Nature is rational. It's balanced. It doesn't overextend or underperform. It acts in accordance with its own inner laws. The sun doesn't apologize for rising. The lion doesn't ask if it's okay to roar. So why do you apologize for existing? Why do you feel guilty for having boundaries? Why do you bite your tongue when your silence only enables more dysfunction? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That's not niceness. That's integrity. And integrity doesn't always look sweet. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it's blunt. Sometimes it's the refusal to tolerate what others have normalized. So here's the first hard truth. Being too nice often means you're putting harmony above truth. And when you do that, you're not avoiding conflict, you're just delaying it. You're allowing 1,000 tiny violations to build up inside you until they either explode or hollow you out from within. Let me ask you something piercing. How much of your life is shaped by who you're afraid of disappointing?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
That question, if you sit with it, can crack open everything. Because most of us don't even realize how much of our behavior is reactive. We're not acting from principle, we're acting from approval. And Marcus Aurelius would call this slavery, not to a person but to opinion. He said, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." That's the paradox of the nice person. You betray yourself to protect an image. You give up your time, your energy, your truth, not out of love, but out of fear. And fear is the opposite of Stoic virtue. The Stoic isn't cold. The Stoic is clear. They ask, what is within my control? And when you're too nice, you give up that control. You hand the steering wheel of your life to anyone who demands it. They say jump, you ask how high. But what if you stop jumping? What if you said, no, I won't do that. I won't lie to keep the peace. I won't shrink to fit your comfort. That's not cruelty. That's courage. Here's where it gets wild. Being too nice actually makes you less trustworthy. Because people can sense when you're not being real. They might admire your politeness, but they won't respect you. Why? Because deep respect is built on clarity, not compliance. When you always say yes, people stop listening to your yes. It loses weight. It becomes automatic, and your words become wallpaper. But when you say no, when you speak with honesty, even when it risks tension, your words carry gravity. And they land. They shape reality. Because they're not performative. They're principled. And that's what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." A good person isn't someone who pleases everyone. A good person is someone who lives in alignment with reason, virtue, and truth, even when it's uncomfortable. But let's go deeper. Why are we addicted to being nice? It's not because we're generous. It's because we're afraid. Afraid of rejection. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of being alone. And this fear disguises itself as kindness. But Marcus would say, you don't overcome fear by feeding it. You overcome fear by facing it. And that means you have to be willing to let people be disappointed. You have to be willing to be misunderstood. Because the moment you start living from truth instead of approval, you will lose people. But what you gain is far more valuable. You gain yourself. You gain peace that isn't dependent on performance. You gain relationships built on respect, not convenience. You gain the inner stillness that Marcus wrote about in his journal when he said, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." But that peace is only possible if you stop disturbing your own soul to keep others comfortable. Let me ask you something most people don't want to hear. What would you do differently if you weren't trying to be liked? That question strips away the fog. It reveals who you really are. Because the Stoics didn't aim to be liked. They aimed to be right. Not in the arrogant sense, but in the moral sense. They trained themselves to act in accordance with reason, not impulse. Fear and niceness, when it's driven by fear, is an impulse. It's a reflex. It's the path of least resistance. But virtue, that's a choice, a discipline, a commitment to something higher than comfort. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to be liked, you actually become loved. Not by everyone, but by the right people. The ones who see your strength, who trust your no as much as your yes, who know that your kindness isn't manipulation, it's a gift, freely given, not a bribe for validation. But here's the warning. Once you stop being too nice, the world will push back. They'll say you've changed, that you're being selfish, that you're colder. But that's only because they were benefiting from your self-abandonment. And Marcus Aurelius would say, good, but let them be uncomfortable. Because your job is not to make others feel better, it's to be better. And sometimes being better means being bolder. It means saying what others won't, doing what others fear, and living in a way that doesn't just soothe the world but challenges it. We live in a world where we confuse being agreeable with being good, where we're taught that the path to peace is paved through politeness, that to be virtuous is to be endlessly accommodating, endlessly available, endlessly soft. But Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics knew something radically different, something we've forgotten in our obsession with being liked. They knew that real virtue is not passive. It's not a doormat. It doesn't surrender truth in the name of harmony. Real virtue is a fortress. It is grounded, immovable, anchored in reason. Marcus didn't survive the endless pressures of ruling an empire by being nice. He survived by building an inner citadel, a place inside himself that could not be touched by flattery, insult, or expectation. And that is what we must build too. Because until we have that core, that boundary, that unshakable sense of who we are and what we stand for, we will always be at the mercy of the world's demands. We will be puppets to approval, slaves to guilt, actors in someone else's play. And here's the paradox: the softer your external niceness, the harder your life becomes. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, a piece of your integrity erodes. Every time you let someone cross your boundary without consequence, you train them to keep doing it. And every time you silence your truth to make someone else more comfortable, you abandon the only thing that ever really belonged to you: your mind, your judgment, your inner clarity. That's not compassion. That's self-erasure. And the Stoics would call that a violation of nature, because nature didn't design you to be endlessly compliant. It designed you to live with logos, with reason, with a soul that knows when to yield, but also when to stand firm. Marcus wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He did not write, "Smile and let them walk all over you." He did not write, "Be so nice that you forget who you are." No, he wrote with fire. He ruled with compassion, yes, but also with clarity. And you can too. You can be kind without being weak. You can be generous without being used. You can forgive without forgetting who you are. But that only happens when you stop outsourcing your peace to the reactions of others and start fortifying your soul with philosophical discipline. And that begins in the smallest moments, the subtle no. You were afraid to say, the truth you were afraid to speak, the standard you were afraid to uphold, because you thought it would make you difficult. But as Marcus knew, it's not difficult to live with virtue, it's difficult to live without it. It's difficult to live without boundaries, without standards, without the self-respect that says, "I will love you, but I will not lie for you. I will serve you, but I will not shrink for you. I will help carry your burdens, but I will not carry your expectations like chains." And here's the real beauty: once you build this fortress, not a wall that shuts people out, but a foundation that holds you steady, you become more compassionate, not less. Because now your kindness is not a performance. It's not a manipulation. It's not a transaction. It's a free gift, offered from strength, not from fear. You're not giving to be seen. You're not pleasing to be accepted. You're simply living in accordance with who you are. That's what the Stoic means by virtue. That's what Marcus means when he says, "If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining." Because when your soul is anchored, you don't need to control everything around you. You don't need to fix everyone's feelings. You don't need to be seen as nice. You just need to be true. And from that truth, real peace emerges, not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep peace of knowing you didn't betray yourself to get through the day. So let me ask you something that might change your life. What would it feel like to stop negotiating your worth in every interaction? What would it feel like to walk into a room and not need to be liked, not because you're arrogant, but because you're whole? That's the Stoic ideal. That's the power of the inner fortress. And it's not built through perfection, it's built through practice and through tiny acts of courage, through the daily decision to stop pleasing and start living in truth. Because the world doesn't need more people who are nice, it needs people who are real, who are anchored, who are strong enough to love without losing themselves. That's what Marcus modeled. That's what the Stoics demand. And that's what you are capable of, the minute you stop confusing peace with passivity and start reclaiming the power of your own mind. You've been trained to believe that saying no is selfish, that to deny someone is to hurt them, or that to protect your energy is rude, that to prioritize your inner peace is somehow a betrayal of the social contract. And so you say yes again and again until your calendar is full, your energy is drained, and your identity is a patchwork of what other people wanted from you. But deep down, you know something's wrong. You feel fragmented, resentful, like you're living a borrowed life. And the Stoics would see it for what it is, not kindness, but cowardice, not virtue, but vice. Because to constantly say yes when you mean no is to lie with your life. It's to violate the principle that Marcus Aurelius lived by: never value anything as profitable to yourself, which shall compel you to break your promise, than to lose your self-respect, or to hate any man in your heart. And every false yes is a broken promise not to them, but to you, and a crack in the foundation of your integrity, a slow erosion of your sovereignty. So the Stoics would ask, what is the cost of your compliance? Because everything has a cost, and the price of being too nice is often paid in silence, anxiety, and a quiet, growing contempt for the life you never fully chose. But here's the philosophical pivot: saying no isn't rejection. It's redirection. When you say no to something that violates your values, you're saying yes to something sacred: your time, your truth, your telos, your reason for being. That's not selfish. That's strategic. That's the essence of Stoicism: to live in accordance with nature, with reason, and with what's best for the whole, not just in the short term, but in the full arc of your life. Marcus didn't say yes to everyone. He didn't let every voice into his mind. He filtered the noise. He protected his focus. And so must we. Because not every opportunity is aligned with your path. Not every invitation deserves your presence. Not every person is entitled to your energy. And when you say no from a place of clarity and care, you're not pushing people away, you're drawing sacred lines so that what is truly meant for you can actually find you. Let me ask you something that might sting. How many of your yeses were really just fear in disguise? Fear of being disliked, fear of confrontation, fear of seeming selfish, fear of not being enough unless you're constantly proving your goodness. But Stoic philosophy doesn't leave room for that kind of fear. It asks us to be ruled not by emotion, but by logos, by rational thought, by moral clarity, by the kind of long-term wisdom that builds a life of substance. And when you develop that lens, you realize something profound. The most loving thing you can do for people isn't to always agree with them. It's to model what self-respect looks like. It's to show them what it means to live with boundaries, with purpose, with unapologetic truthfulness. That's how you elevate others, not by pleasing them, but by being an example of wholeness. Because when you say no with love, you give others permission to do the same. You break the cycle of performance. And you invite people into a deeper relationship, one built not on appeasement, but on authenticity. And there's a secret benefit the Stoics knew well: saying no sharpens your soul. It clarifies what matters. It forces you to define your principles. Because the more you say no to what doesn't align, the more you uncover what does. You begin to see your path, not as something handed to you, but as something you carve through discernment. Every no becomes a chisel, shaping the sculpture of your life. And slowly, the noise fades, the resentment fades, the exhaustion fades. What's left is presence, strength, a life that feels like your own. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire, yet he made time every day to reflect, to write, to realign. Why? Because he knew that no external demand was worth the price of internal disarray. He understood that the soul must be guarded like a temple. And that means learning to say no, not just to people, but to distractions, to temptations, to anything that pulls you away from your highest self. So let's get practical. How do you stop being too nice? You start by asking a brutal question before every yes. Is this aligned with who I'm becoming, or is this a way to avoid discomfort? If it's the latter, pause, breathe, sit in the discomfort, let it burn. Because that fire is forging something rare, your backbone, your voice, your clarity. And once you taste that clarity, you'll never go back to pleasing. Why? Because the cost is too high. Because you'll realize that the people who truly love you don't need you to bend. They need you to stand. And the people who only loved your compliance, they were never really loving you, they were loving their control over you. And it's okay to lose that. It's okay to walk away. Marcus Aurelius lost friends, faced betrayal, endured the loneliness of leadership. But he chose the harder path because it was the right path. And we must do the same, not with resentment, but with resolve. The Stoic way isn't cruel. It's clear. It's the path of the philosopher who loves deeply, but not blindly, who serves selflessly, but not mindlessly, who shows up fully, but not at the cost of their soul. And this is the great paradox of our time. The world tells you to be nice, but what the world needs is people who are whole, people with boundaries, people with backbone, people who can say no with grace and yes with conviction, people who don't perform virtue but live it, quietly, steadily, unshakably, like Marcus, like Seneca, like Epictetus, who literally had no power, no wealth, no social status, but who lived freer than most kings, because he knew that real freedom is the ability to say no to anything that compromises your character. So let me leave you with one final, piercing question. Who would you become if you stopped performing and started living from principle? Not from guilt, not from fear, not from the need to be seen as good, but from a deeper place, a place rooted in wisdom, in integrity, in the kind of strength that says, I will not betray myself, not for applause, not for comfort, not for anyone. That's not selfish, that's stoic. That's the only way to live a life that's truly yours.